Hi, welcome to the Also Called podcast, where we're asking hard questions about our place in this hectic world.
Join us as we dig into the truth about who God is, possibly discovering that we are also called. Welcome to the Also Called podcast. In today's episode, we're welcoming Allison Lindsey here to talk to us about Elizabeth and the repeated trauma that can happen from repeated disillusionment and disappointment. Welcome to the show today, and let's talk through Elizabeth.
With Allison. Allison is joining us and going to give her perspective on that. So Allison, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm originally from Mississippi, and as a teenager, I moved to Georgia, lived there for quite a long time, then moved to Florida, and I'm now currently building my practice in Florida, where I had one in Georgia for many years. So I'm really excited to be a part of this project. It just, to me, really brings out something that a lot of women, I think, maybe didn't really understand, and just a place to go to, really it almost is a resource to understand all the different women that have a part in Jesus's mission.
Thank you. Allison, what is it that drew you to being a part of the Other Disciples project?
To me, I really feel like these women are such an integral part of what Jesus did, and that they came alongside of him and in a lot of ways financially made sure that he was able to do what God called him to do, and that they really are another disciple alongside of all of the men that were participating.
Allison, what drew you to Elizabeth's story?
Well, I think it's something that unfortunately is very relatable for a lot of people, that wanting something to change in your life and potentially praying about it and trying to do all kinds of other things to change it, and just the disappointment over and over and over again begins to kind of come to this place of just out and out discouragement and exhaustion. For some people, it's a place where they give up. But for us who are believers, we know that there's always hope with God, and to continue to pray and seek God's answers and his journey for our lives.
I love that. What did you enjoy most about writing about her, or at least relate to her and her story?
Unfortunately, I have experienced some long-term trauma myself. Just wanted to kind of be able to use someone in the Bible as a relatable person that had experienced something that was just extremely long-term. I mean, she was quite up in age by the time things changed for her. Just knowing that kind of helplessness feeling of being stuck in a situation that you didn't feel like you could change.
So earlier in the book, you talked about trauma in Mary Magdalene's story, but what happens when trauma stays around for longer? Asha in this chapter with Elizabeth brings up PTSD. What is that, and how is it different to trauma?
PTSD is actually a diagnosis that is when someone has had exposure to a traumatic event or a series of events that are of an extremely threatening nature. So these are not little disturbances. These are things that may be even life-threatening, and that they can be prolonged, they can be repetitive, and that the person who's experiencing that type of trauma feels like they can't escape it. There's nothing that they can do, that potentially it could be even dangerous for them to escape the trauma. And so when we try to differentiate that from trauma, basically we're saying the PTSD is the result of trauma for some people who have experienced it, that not everyone gets to that point where they're exhibiting the symptoms of PTSD. They're having, nightmares. They're reliving almost the situation where they feel like they're back in it and that they can't escape it. I even watched a TV show that was so appropriate for someone who had been in combat And it showed him cowered in a corner, really feeling like he was back in combat and that his life was being threatened. And the person that was trying to help him actually had to remind him, hey, I'm, this person, and I'm here with you. You're okay, to bring him out of it. And that is an extreme of trauma. That's not what I would say most people's symptoms and results end up being.
So in Mary Magdalene's chapter, you talked about trauma residing in this frontal lobe. Is PTSD living in that same place, or maybe is it more widespread throughout the body?
It is actually widespread. Yeah, there's physical sensations that represent what they felt during the situation. So it is very much so a much more intense feeling. Yeah.
Listening to different podcasts, they talk about how you're not responding to the current thing that's happening because you're feeling all that stuff. It brings you back physically and emotionally, the things that you're experiencing, back to that initial trauma. And it's so you can't really completely, the word they used was integrate the stuff that you're experiencing right now, because complex trauma affects the physiological brain. That's so the podcast is Trauma Rewired, because you can, thankfully, because God is good and the way he designs us, we can rewire our brain. We can create new neural pathways. But they talk about how it encompasses the physical, emotional, and intellectual
Mhm.
experience, and how we're seeing it through a lens of what happened before, and we're not really able to embody ourselves in this moment. Looking at it from the PTSD, because of ongoing disappointment and trauma that Elizabeth experienced, how do you see that applying to her?
Her barrenness, it was a prolonged condition over many, many decades. And that to her, it felt impossible for her to just be able to change that or escape that situation on her own. And we know that only God could change that. And he did. And that's the beauty of, seeing her story is that among other women in the Bible, he changed her barrenness to wholeness, and she was able to conceive a child.
I think what's interesting about Elizabeth is we miss today the stigma that came with barrenness back then. It's not the same quite today as it was then. I mean, there's the longing, definitely still. At that time, women's almost sole purpose was marriage and children and rearing their children. Hers was pretty extreme because that was her only outlet, her only purpose. So, can you talk a little bit about like what's happening in the body when somebody has PTSD?
They're feeling the sensations, the fear goes throughout their body. So you can feel the heart rate increase and the breathing increase because that fight or flight part of our brain, the amygdala, begins to activate different parts of our body. And so we're ready to be in combat and fight with the enemy when maybe we're just in the grocery store. And that's the scary thing for people who experience that.
Why does it move out of the brain into the body? What's happening? Because I remember when I was reading The Body Keeps the Score, he was talking about the physical movements that he has his clients do to move it out. So, how does it move from the brain to the body?
Well, because the situation that they were in initially, the initial trauma was so physical. They were in, a totally different environment, and it the sensations in their body now are there to help them kind of saturate themselves back into that situation. I feel exactly physically the way I did, and emotionally I'm feeling all those emotions, and I'm sometimes seeing things that were there then but aren't there now.
Because I just imagine her, whether it's miscarrying and cramping and seeing blood and how traumatic that can be, but even just her monthly cramps she might have
Mhm.
had might have been traumatic by a certain point in her life where it's like, I thought I was pregnant and I'm not. So I
Right.
just,
And then
imagine
again,
that even her own body felt like it was betraying her.
yes.
And Mia, back to the cultural expectations of a woman at that time and the pressure that was on her. Also, if we look at culturally, her husband could have divorced her. So
Mm,
it's not just the loss and the longing, it could also be fear of survival for her, quite honestly, at this point. So that's another level of this fear in our brain, and it plugging into that part of like, you're in danger, this is real.
yes.
When I think about just relational with Zechariah, that whole question of, am I enough? Have I disappointed him for his life, not being able to have children with him, and starting to ask those questions of, am I enough for
Mhm.
him, or should I release him to go be with somebody else to have children? So I just,
Mhm.
never really sat down till we're talking about this, just looking at the different layers of how something that on the surface seems like a trauma could actually lead to something more serious like PTSD. Uh,
Yes.
So when you look at Elizabeth, what did you take away from her story?
I took kind of a line from what Asha wrote is that because of Jesus, we can have real hope. Even when things seem hopeless and we're looking around and we have no idea how things can change, he can fill us with hope that he can do miracles, that things that we look at and think that is impossible, there's no way that this could be any different. He can change that. Even when we've been waiting for things to change for what feels like forever, we don't have to give up hope that his perfect timing is still ahead of us.
That's so beautiful. I love that. Recognizing that when we structured the chapters of this book, it's actually the structure spiritual formation. That it starts with Mary Cleophas, who you opened the book with us. It's just having eyes to possibly see that
Yeah.
this is Jesus. He is the Messiah. He is, in today's terms, the one who can make me whole and save me. And then getting to Elizabeth's chapter, where she was a believer, that wasn't a question for her. She had grown, she had gone through some really hard stuff. And can she still have awe in the longing? Can she
Mm,
still believe that he is good when she's not seeing it? And that all of our women are on this trajectory of going from, believing or not even knowing that they needed to believe,
right.
to being able to stand and believe anyway when we're not seeing his
Mm.
goodness right now. We're not believing, or we're questioning, is he going to be good to me? Did you, as you were writing, both of those women see that change in the disciples? Because what's interesting is you had all Marys except for
Yeah,
Elizabeth,
right. I know.
and
Huh.
just seeing that pattern of growth.
Yeah, it was like a maturity of, yes, she believes. That's not the question. It's, is he going to do this for me,
Mhm.
the individual? Yeah,
And even getting to the place where even if he doesn't, she
right.
still believes, she still
Yeah,
thinks he's
that
good,
God's still good.
but I
Yeah.
still want it.
Right, yes.
Yes.
But I'll take it if you give it to me.
Yes, exactly,
Yes.
exactly.
Thank you so much, Allison, for sharing your wisdom with us. We appreciate it, and I know our listeners do too. So, guys, be sure to check the show notes where we will link anything that we discussed. We appreciate you joining us today for the conversation with Also Called. That was our last chapter of the other disciples. So be sure to join us next week as we wrap up the season
Stay curious.
and keep seeking. Thank you so much for joining us today. Also Called provides a space for honest conversations about the truth of who God is, who we are, and the relationships He wants us to have with Him, each other, the church, and ourselves. This episode was just the start of the conversation. Be sure to check the show notes for extra resources to go further. You can also find our social media sites to join the discussion. Don't miss our next chat by subscribing to our YouTube channel or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Also Called is part of Bible and Pop Culture, a crowd-funded nonprofit that allows us to provide our content to start great conversations for free. You can help us keep doing this by checking out BibleandPopCulture.com or AlsoCalled.org's Donate Subscribe buttons with a one-time gift, supporting us monthly, or sharing us with someone who might like the conversation. Thank you for being a part, and see you next conversation.